Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to give people a few moments to join us. I know that this is looks to be a very heavily attended webinar, and so I want to just allow a few moments for people to join, and then I'll be doing some introductions. Okay, I'm going to begin. Welcome, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg. I am the founder of Canadian Fertility Consulting. We are a surrogacy agency and egg donor program that helps people from all over the world access surrogacy in Canada. And I'm just so grateful to the amazing team of lawyers who are going to speak to you today about the process of entering Canada in order to come and meet your babies, which I'm sure all of you are very excited about. And for those of you who are new to surrogacy, I hope that you are able to learn a great deal about the process here today. So today we are joined by Cindy Wasser, who after almost 25 years as one of Canada's top criminal lawyers, Cindy thought she was retiring in 2008 to become a mom through surrogacy to the first of her two beautifully created daughters. Driven by her difficult journey along the path to parenthood, she instead founded Hope Springs Fertility Law to guide, protect, and advocate for everyone creating families with the help of donors and surrogates. Next, we will be hearing from Alexandra Cole. She is an associate at Green & Spiegel LLP in Toronto. Alexandra practices in all areas of Canadian immigration and in all areas of Canadian immigration and citizenship law, including work, student, and visitor visas and permits, immigration and refugee board hearings, federal court litigation, permanent residency, admissibility and enforcement matters, investigations, and humanitarian and compassionate applications. We are also joined by Stephen Green. He is one of the two senior partners at Green & Spiegel and is certified as a specialist in immigration law by the Law Society of Ontario. Stephen has been practicing immigration law for 30 years and has extensive experience in all areas of Canadian immigration. Stephen has been identified for many years as a leading practitioner in immigration law. He is considered a subject matter expert in the field, frequently asked to speak as a panelist, moderator, and lecturer. And our final presenter is Tim Golden. He is the U.S. Practice Director at Green & Spiegel LLP in Toronto. He's been working in the field of U.S. immigration law for nearly 20 years. Since joining the firm in 2007, Tim has been developing the office's U.S. immigration practice. And due to the unique global position of Green & Spiegel, he has developed a keen and distinguished experience with in-person border applications through U.S. Customs, U.S. consular investor visa applications, and a variety of U.S. applications involving employer and familial sponsorship. His experience covers the full gamut of U.S. immigration matters for both temporary and permanent U.S. statuses. What that tells me is you all are in for a treat. These leading industry professionals will be walking you through the process of coming to Canada to be present for the birth of your child. And it's just such a pleasure, and I look forward to hearing from them, as I'm sure you do. I will now pass it over to Jordan, who will be moderating our webinar today.
Thank you, Leah. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Stark, and I'm part of the marketing team at Canadian Fertility Consulting, and I'm happy to be here with our speakers today. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. Number one is that we know everyone is at home right now, so in the event that you have an internet connection issue, please call in using a phone. I ask that you please take note of the phone number that's included with your webinar registration email. You can call in so you can still participate. Item number two is that we'd like you to be aware that we are recording this webinar today, and everyone who registered will be sent a direct link to watch this again. After the webinar, we'll also be sending out an email with all of the contact information for our speakers today so that you can get in touch with them one-on-one. And last but not least, we will be taking questions live throughout the webinar today. So we ask that if you do have a question for one of our speakers, to please type them into the questions tab. If you have any issues throughout the webinar, please put your hand up and I can assist you with that. And we would like to remind everyone that this information that is being provided to you today is current information for April 3rd, 2020, and we recommend that you keep informed and updated regularly as things are changing pretty frequently these days. I'll now ask for Cindy Wasser to come onto the screen. Hi, Cindy.
Hello,
we can get started.
Okay, thank you so much for having me and for organizing this. It's been an extraordinary 2.5-week journey. It all began, I think, around mid-March, around the 13th, when we started to consider the fact that travel restrictions were coming into place due to COVID. And Leah and I started talking about it, and she began to contact all of her clients at Canadian Fertility Consultants to begin the process of making travel arrangements just in case. None of us realized around mid-March what the consequences would turn into of COVID, how limited flights would become, or for how long the restrictions would come into place. Only a few days later, around March 16th, we got news of the actual travel ban, and it, however, seemed to include an exemption for Canadian citizens and their immediate family members. Well, most of us in the fertility world naturally concluded that that would include the parents of these newborn babies. We reasonably understood that this would allow the foreign parents to gain entry into Canada. We thought maybe they would need some sort of application, but we didn't know how or to whom they would make that application. So that day I contacted a member of Parliament with whom Leah and I have been working in a large group of people advocating for a decriminalization bill regarding surrogacy reimbursements and donor reimbursements. And he immediately introduced us to the Director of Policy for the Minister of Global Affairs, because we kept thinking this was really a global affairs issue. She responded that night, advising that she would provide details regarding the exemptions immediately. And she also confirmed that the US-Canadian border would be shutting at noon the following day. So March 17th starts. The Director of Policy contacts me that morning and immediately connects me with the Director of Policy of Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, who then called Leah and I that afternoon, and we raised two major issues with her. One was that there were foreigners who needed to gain entry into Canada to be present for the birth of their babies. And the second is that once they had their babies, they needed to get passports and be able to leave the country and go back home. And at that point, we were told that US citizens would still be able to gain entry into Canada. She explained to us that the exemption for Canadian relatives specifically excluded parents, and that under the Immigration Act, this was designed to prevent essentially people of my age or slightly younger than me from applying to bring in their elderly, frail, sick parents from other countries to gain entry automatically into Canada. And she realized that immediately this was a serious issue, a gap in the legislation, that no one had considered, that there were newborns coming who would be Canadian citizens who needed their parents here, and that those parents were not always Canadian citizens. So she promised to bring this to the immediate attention of the minister so that it could be raised with cabinet that day, and that some sort of emergency relief or amendment to legislation would be granted. And she was very confident of this. She asked us how many numbers we had, and Leah, who has her pulse on this better than anyone I know, and has the largest fertility agency, estimated about 40 to 50 families over the next several months who would be affected by this issue. And then we were asked to provide the names and the expectant birth dates of those with imminent births. So We got to work on that. I started a group in Canada of all the agencies and fertility lawyers I could think of and reached out to them to tell them what we were doing. My colleague in Alberta, Ellen Embury, drafted a letter that she shared with all of us as a preliminary travel explanation letter. And my colleague, Elise Shopper-Brugel in British Columbia, set to work on the Vital Statistics Office there to begin a streamlined birth registration process so that people could leave the country faster. The following day, May 18th, the director contacted us and I spoke with her and she said people without imminent births should remain home. I had clients from Australia who were coming to Toronto via Houston in the US. They landed in Houston and were denied entry or boarding on their flight to Toronto. And we got word that Passport Canada had shut its doors, leaving the foreigners stranded. The director then advised that they were also working with Transport Canada and Global Affairs to rectify the situation. All of this, by the way, was happening in the midst of our government responding to a myriad, thousands of COVID issues, but this was being considered as a very serious one. The following day, March 19th, my colleague Robin Kazina in Manitoba was able to obtain a passport on an urgent basis for her foreign clients whose baby required immediate medical attention back home, and she provided us with a detailed process from the passport office. The director suggested I contact my clients in Houston to get them to a border city so that they could drive over the border before the border between Canada and US closed on Friday night. Again, we were told to please keep those with later birth dates at home and to not purchase airline tickets. March 20th was the night I didn't sleep. And during that night, I thought about this as an immigration issue more than anything and thought, who do you call in the middle of an immigration emergency? Who are you going to call? Green and Spiegel. So I called Stephen Green that morning and shared his contact with our working group. Several lawyers contacted him immediately directly on behalf of their clients. My clients in Houston got a flight to Detroit, and I also received contact from an Israeli citizen who was taking a flight from Tel Aviv into San Francisco. I sent him a message to get to Detroit as well. Stephen contacted his people at immigration, and he confirmed that Canadian Border Services would be advised of the arrival of these two families. We were also told that a solution to this problem was forthcoming. The director confirmed that Border Services were aware of these families. At 1:30, my clients from Australia were granted entry. At 2:30, we received notice that there was some guidance about essential travel that was now being allowed between Canada and the US. And at 6:30 p.m. that night, the Israeli was granted entry into Canada. So that gave us a little bit of reprieve over the weekend. March 24th, passport applications and confirmation from the Director of Immigration that a plan to exempt the families from travel restrictions was in the making. March 25th, an urgent matter developed for French clients of ours who were expecting their second child through a Canadian surrogate. So they had a Canadian citizen child already. The Director of Global Affairs got involved and said they were following up on it. Passport Canada called my office to advise the details of how we could obtain emergency passports for all the babies so that those families could leave the country quickly. March 26th, we learned from CFC, from Leah, that Spanish parents were on a flight to Canada, and we learned of the Order in Council. The Order in Council was passed within a week of this coming to their attention, and it changed the definition of an immediate family member to include the parents of those Canadian citizens so that the people like my French clients who already had a Canadian child were now allowed to enter. Global Affairs sent them an email confirming that they were able to board their flight out of Paris. The Order in Council also explains that dependent children in Canada includes those born through assisted human reproduction technologies. These people still need a letter from Immigration or Global Affairs saying they are exempt for the purposes of reuniting with immediate families in Canada. This includes those babies even though they aren't born, because it was simply silly to say they'll have to wait for those babies to be born. Our government recognized a couple of essential elements here. One, there's a 2-week quarantine period. These parents must be in the country for at least 2 weeks before the birth so that they can attend to their newborn at the hospital and be present for the birth. 2, there are limited and more limited flights. Restrictions are developing quickly, so it's becoming very difficult for people to get on flights. They need to get on the earliest available flight. And 3, babies come when babies want to come, and we typically see some premature births. But what was developing in the last few weeks is a number of premature births, and we're beginning to wonder if the stress that these surrogates are feeling as a result of COVID is causing early labor. So we gave all of this information to the ministries, and they started to work on a long-term plan to deal with the other families whose births were not as imminent. A list of lawyers, the lawyers created a list of their clients, and we provided a preliminary list to Stephen Green. Ellen Embry, my colleague in Alberta, provided an updated travel exemption letter that could assist Stephen Green's firm. And then we started to hand over the files to Stephen's firm so that they could begin the process. And now, Stephen, why don't you take it over?
Oh, Stephen, your microphone.
There. Cindy, thank you so much. You know, listening to the, I don't even like to use the word story because people will find it hard to believe what you've gone through with your colleagues, helping your various clients to get here. It really is, a miracle, and you're involved in so many wonderful things, helping all these wonderful people from all around the world that none of us could have expected such difficulties in entering Canada. So I just want to add a little bit more with respect to what Cindy has stated. I think it's important to understand how this whole process works in a general way. And what happened was, obviously, there was the COVID issue and the government of Canada had to deal with it. And the way they decided to deal with it was to divide it into 3 areas of responsibility, where you had the people responsible for health in Canada. So they have a little responsibility in this ban, if we can use that word. We have another department, which is sort of global affairs, which looks at Canada interests all around the world. Then we have immigration, that's responsible for creating the policy to determine who should be allowed to come into Canada from an immigration perspective. And then we have the people at the border. We call them the CBSA officers, and those officers implement the policy that immigration creates. So for example, if immigration says there is a ban, but there are certain exceptions, here they are, it's up to the CBSA officer at the border to make that determination. So that's why it really is, quite difficult for a lot of these departments to work together to make sure that everything is going the way the Minister of Health wants, immigration wants, the CBSA people. So I really think that we should give a lot of commendment to these various departments, because the government has moved so fast. As Cindy has expressed, when she heard of certain issues, the government responded pretty darn fast, as far as my experience has been with the government. So in order to kind of protect Canada, the government decided to pass two kinds of laws. And Cindy referred to these things as orders in council. And what an order in council is that the Cabinet of Canada, meaning, the Minister of Public Security, the Minister of Immigration, the Minister of Health, they get together with the Prime Minister and they can pass these special orders because of the urgency and the importance to the Canadian people. So they passed two of them. One they passed dealt with pretty much US citizens. And it basically stated that if you are in the United States as an American citizen, or in the United States holding a special document for Canada, could be a work permit or a study permit to let you study. And if you had been in the United States for at least 14 days prior to your desire to come into Canada, then the border people will let you in at their discretion. But it was very important that it wasn't considered coming to Canada for tourism, recreation, entertainment. So it's really important that if you are crossing the border from the United States into Canada on some of the other exemptions we're going to talk about, that what they're looking for all the time when people are coming from the US is, are you coming for tourism, recreation, or entertainment? And if you are, we're not letting you in. So it's really important that you understand that you have to have sort of a plan of what you want to do in Canada, and it can't be for any of those particular reasons. So to facilitate the rights of Canadians, the government of Canada said, basically, if you are a Canadian and you are outside of Canada, you have the absolute right to come into Canada. If you are an immigrant of Canada, like the Americans call it a green card. If you have a Canadian green card, immigration, you also have the right to come into Canada. And you are permitted as a immigrant or as a Canadian citizen to be accompanied with your dependents. And the government then decided, what does it mean to be a dependent? So if I am a Canadian citizen and I have dependents that aren't Canadians, maybe they were, I don't know, I adopted them abroad and they haven't finished the process. So anyone that's under the age of 22, that's a dependent of mine as a Canadian, is allowed to come into Canada, no problem. If I am married in a common law relationship, same-sex relationship, and I am a Canadian, that dependent can come with me as well. And also, if I am a Canadian and I have parents, my parents are allowed to come with me or join me if I am inside of Canada. And the government even went ahead and said that if I'm a Canadian and I have a tutor helping my kids, things like that, that person can even join me. So the ban that was referred to with respect to Canadians and permanent residents are, it's not a very restrictive ban, because we permit Canadians and permanent residents as a right to come into Canada. Alex, is there anything that I missed just talking about the Canadians and permanent residents?
Nope, I think you've covered it. I think coming from the US, if you are a US citizen or someone from there, you mentioned, you can't be coming for tourism or recreation. And really the key is that you have to show it's not optional or not discretionary. You have an essential purpose or reason to be here. So if you're an intended parent coming from the US, I think that argument could be made pretty well that you have a need and a non-optional reason to be in Canada.
But Alex, what happens if I show up at the border as an American coming up here to go through the process, and I say I just want to go right to that hospital, I got to get in there immediately? I mean, is that a problem?
That is a problem. So everyone must quarantine when they arrive in Canada, subject to some very limited exceptions. But if you are an intended parent coming up, you are going to have a 14-day quarantine plan. That means you need to know where you're staying for 14 days, how you're going to be receiving groceries, getting essential things to your place that you are staying. So that can be a hotel booking, an Airbnb booking. Those are the two common ones that we'll see. But you really do need to have that documentation and that clear idea in your mind to be able to advise border officials and make them feel comfortable with your entry.
So you're saying then that if I come up to the border and I'm driving across Detroit, Windsor, I have to have a real plan, or I could be denied entry then, even as a American coming in?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So we've got this sort of law for Americans and people in the United States, and then the government went ahead and passed another law dealing with the rest of the world. And basically what they said there was that there is a ban coming into Canada for people from other parts of the world outside of the United States. They cannot come into Canada, period. But then they recognized that there were exceptions that had to be made. And some of those exceptions are people that are related to a Canadian citizen, in the sense of, in Cindy's example, where she talked about some, family had come here, had a child, took the child back to France. That child is a Canadian citizen. Therefore, even if the parents were not Canadian citizens, they were French nationals, they have the absolute right to come into Canada because they have a child that is Canadian. So it's interesting that. And so the other law then talks about who is allowed to come or not subject to that ban. So anyone that is on a work permit from abroad can come into Canada and is not subject to that ban. Anyone that was a student on a student visa and got their visa before the 18th of March, allowed to come into Canada. And any type of sort of essential services that must be performed in Canada to facilitate, the public health, to make sure that our supply chains are working properly. So those types of exemptions. But when Alex and I looked through the various exemptions of people allowed to come into Canada from other parts of the world, there really was, a difficulty in us trying to locate the special exemption for people that were coming to meet their new surrogate child when it was born. So what we created was a special channel, which is set up for anyone, where you ask permission of the three departments that I talked about. One of the three, that was public health, one was public security, the other one was immigration, and say to them, we think we have a special exemption situation. We're giving you as much notice as possible. And if they agreed with Alex and I, they would provide the particular parent with a special letter which stated the following. It states, this authorization, this is coming from the Government of Canada, this authorization is only assessment that your presence in Canada is for the purpose of reuniting with your immediate family members, not for travel of an optional or discretionary nature, such as tourism, recreation, or entertainment. So again, you know, you see this, we're getting this exemption for immediate family, but you have to understand what you must explain to the airline, to the border when you arrive, and talk about this letter. Maybe Alex can go into sort of more detail in how this letter is arrived at, what's needed, timing wise, what you're looking for, obviously, to take the stress away, not only from Cindy and all her wonderful people across Canada, but of course the parents and the surrogate mom.
So, you know, we have been dealing with a lot of individuals coming from, you know, various countries around the world, most recently a lot of Australian intended parents. And I think a lot of that urgency came out of the fact that, you know, flights from Australia to Canada have started to be restricted as early as this week, and I think they're going to be paused. So in terms of timelines, you know, as Stephen has kind of alluded to, the government is working as quickly as possible, and I think they've done a great job in prioritizing people that really did need to be here, you know, in the last 2 weeks. So obviously, we want to be getting these authorizations as soon as possible, and you know, intended parents should be thinking about booking the earliest flight of the country where they're coming from to get to Canada before we see more restrictions on flights. It's not always, you know, feasible for people to come, you know, 2, 3, 4 months before the birth of the child, but you need to be thinking about those considerations. So I would say, you know, as soon as possible, but it is possible to get these letters from the government with a 3-day, 1-day lead time if need be. So, you know, just keep those factors in mind when you're deciding when you should be traveling and when you should be reaching out to get this process started.
You know, and so it's interesting, you know, there's so many moving components here, because not only are we talking about the various exceptions in Canada, how you get the special letter to permit you to board the airplane, but now you're also dealing with the aircraft personnel who have to make determinations really on behalf of the Canadian government. You're talking about situations in your home country where, you know, flights could be canceled. So I guess the message that's really important that Alex and I and so many other people involved in this, Cindy and her whole team, is, you know, prepare. Start now. You don't want to have just the added pressure in your life of saying, where is that letter? Where is that letter? If we can get things going sooner, the better. So I think really, you know, Alex, unless you have anything extra to add about, you know, the special authorization and the process, we're pretty good.
Well, I think it's important to collaborate with your, you know, your surrogacy lawyer, your agency, because they are the ones, you know, with their finger on the pulse, and they'll be able to help you, you know, coordinate some of the information that we do need. So it's important that the government has enough documentation and enough information from you as the intended parent to confirm that you are eligible for this authorization letter, and to give it to you at the time that you need it. So, you know, things like your intended flight date, if you haven't yet booked your flight, if you have, you know, your itinerary, your surrogacy agreement, proof that your surrogate is a Canadian and residing in Canada, which can be, you know, a Canadian identification, a letter from the doctor confirming, you know, the date of intended birth. So I think some of those items, you know, it's not an exhaustive list, but some of those items are the things you should be thinking about gathering. And of course, when we're working with people, we're giving you very clear guidance on what we need from you and when we need it. So that's something to think about. An interesting piece that's kind of an overlap, not necessarily an immigration related issue, but insurance policies. So you're obviously, you know, traveling in an interesting time. And you're going to need to demonstrate that you do have an insurance policy. And I know that some policies have indicated, or some companies have indicated, that they want to see this authorization letter to have your insurance policy stay valid. So that's an important piece to consider. And I think anyone coming from the United States, where you won't necessarily be getting this specific authorization letter because the rules are slightly different coming from the US to Canada, you should review your insurance policy and maybe talk about that with your surrogacy lawyer if it is appropriate, to make sure that your policy will be valid.
Yeah. Alex, for countries that don't need visas to come to Canada, like Australia, Israel, can you talk a little bit about, yes, we have to get them the special letter, but in addition to that special letter, the normal immigration requirements still apply, correct?
Correct. And one of those key requirements is to have an electronic travel authorization. That's an ETA. This is an online process that visa exempt foreign nationals can do before traveling to Canada. I think it costs $7. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's basically just inputting your biodata information and answering some questions about your travel, and if you have any criminal history, any medical history. So you are required to get that done before we can make this request for you, because what we're seeing is the authorization letters are actually granted to the validity of your ETA. The ETA is essentially what allows you to board the airplane in normal times. So anyone traveling to Canada typically needs that, and it's still in place. You still do need that.
Do the ETAs, they apply to everyone in the world, or is there a certain exemption?
So American citizens are exempt from the ETA. And of course, anyone who needs a visa to travel to Canada, they will need to still apply for a visa at the consulate. And when the consulate assesses and issues them the visa, they automatically also issue the ETA to the person.
Right. And then when these people, so hopefully, you've got your ETA, you've got your special authorization letter saying you're allowed to be united with your family. But then again, at the border, you still must have a proper plan of your entry into Canada. So I'm coming in, I'm going to quarantine myself for 14 days. This is where I'm staying, as you've suggested. I mean, we always give our clients, a package, and we call it almost a pocket letter, so that the CBSA officer knows if there's any questions, he or she contacts us and we're able to deal with it right at the border when somebody comes. So I guess, Alex, we're pretty much done our part, and maybe we'll pass it over to Leah, Jordan.
Hi guys, it's Jordan. I do have a question here. We would just like to know, we have quite a few intended parents wondering when exactly they should reach out to you to retain your services.
Alex?
As soon as possible. When you do reach out, we will reiterate to you, the relevant considerations. And as Cindy talked about earlier, babies come early, flights could be delayed or canceled. So you need to be thinking about those things when deciding when to reach out. Do it as soon as possible, and then we can get you situated where you need to be for when you're planning on traveling to Canada, and answer any questions you have. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're still just thinking about it, but you want to, get on the list or start the process.
And if I could just add that one of the countries that has added a complicating factor to arriving here is Australia, which has implemented its own restrictions for exiting the country. And so Australians initially were told that they needed to have a flight in order to get the permission to exit, but they couldn't get the flight unless they had the permission to exit. So my colleague, Stephen Page, who's one of the top fertility lawyers there, is a person that I would recommend Australians contact as well. He's been working on putting a process into place and is working with a parent institution there that is working with the government to make sure that they get their permission to leave so they can get their permission to enter and do the work well in advance, considering that the airlines are really restricted between Canada and the US as well.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Cindy, Alexandra, and Stephen. We'll now be joined by Timothy Golden. Tim, can you join us on screen?
Just come in. Hello, everyone.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the webinar, and just building off of the introduction to Cindy and from Stephen and Alex as well. I think the big issues, and I think sort of the area to focus on is twofold. One is for individuals, American citizens who are returning to the U.S. after journeying abroad to adopt, and then also important thing is transit as well, which I think is a big issue that we've identified already. Coming through the United States during these restrictions on travel to the United States is the aspect for many individuals who are traveling potentially to Canada following entry into the United States. And that's the focus for, I think, really sort of the second half, or rather sort of the more sort of compromised ability to enter in based on an ESTA, based on a transit through the United States. But first and foremost, I think the discussion really should center around what are the options for adopting a child abroad, particularly for US citizens, and then returning to the United States with the newborn child and the adopted child. Now, the issue I think to really sort of address initially is the idea of what's available to qualify the newborn as a US citizen, being able to enter into the United States. So obviously sort of the focused example is traveling to Canada for the birth of the surrogate child, and then making a determination about the biological relationship with US citizen parent or both US citizen parent. And with that allows for, through the US Consular Services, to make an application for a report of a consular birth abroad. And in recognition of either two US citizen biological parents, which would determine any of those parents having spent some time resident in the United States anytime, then they would be able to deem that child a US citizen. If it's one biological parent who would be able to be determined to have US citizenship, then it would be by the standard of 5 years of residency within the United States prior to the child's birth, 2 of which came after the age of 14. And it's an involved application, and when it does sort of enter into that realm, identifying residency, etc. But that is really for direct U.S. citizenship for a child would be the only means by which U.S. citizen parents would become returning to the U.S. Without going through the sort of extra steps which are required traditionally for any adopted child. The standard for an adopted child who cannot meet those citizenship requirements is for the process to go through the consulate, and technically speaking, qualifying the newborn child, their adopted child, as a permanent resident that then allows for the individual to enter into the United States, and that transition happens on the ground to U.S. citizenship. But that really is something to be identified as obviously not immediate, and the ability to, or rather sort of understanding what those delays will be, because there is a consideration for sort of across the board, whether it be U.S. citizens who can't claim a direct citizenship for their child, petitioning for them. That is, as is everything these days, delayed, and that's a process that's 14 to 16 months. Granting of the permanent residence and being able to enter into the United States. So I would really strongly encourage sort of an exploration of biological U.S. citizenship claims. And beyond that, that's where, sort of the long-term understanding of returning to the United States with the adopted child really has to be considered, how to map that out. And obviously, as we've been highlighting throughout, the ability to really plan in advance. Now that speaking to that, as well as, and I think this is an important thing, and I hope that people are aware of this, coming up, coming to Canada or going to a foreign country, adopting a child under what may be an independent permanent residence or a temporary work authorization within the United States. And that would be, again, something that is not immediate, has to be a full declaration of the adoption, and then that being presented at a U.S. consulate abroad to deem their child as a dependent under their temporary non-immigrant visa classification. So that sort of covers off individuals who are returning to the United States with a child born abroad that they want to enter into the United States with. Alternatively, I think the big issue that's being discussed is transiting through the United States. And I think that's much more sort of a hot button issue. And as Cindy identified right off the top, sort of the critical gap for US immigration policy that Canadian immigration is addressing, but that the US is really sort of putting everybody in a difficult position, because should an individual, particularly from areas that are facing a quarantine and a bar for entry into the United States, the 14-day bar, and I would say most specifically the Schengen visa area is probably most prominent. That's the issue that, unfortunately, we can't really necessarily answer or provide a solution for, which is an individual coming from Europe, going to Canada, has to transit through the United States. The difficult part, and also, sort of the final landing spot potentially coming in for a European couple coming to the United States to go back to their home country, is that the ESTA, which is a requirement for all visa waiver countries, and Canada is not under that distinction, so they are not under that category, therefore aren't subject to these restrictions. But the ESTA is required to be completed in advance of traveling to the United States. And under this current crisis, they have, US government, Customs and Border Protection and USCIS, have been proactive about actually canceling ESTAs in advance from those countries for individuals who may be coming through. So, with that and that ESTA in place, the problem would be initially, can we transit through the United States? Can we get to the United States under our visitor status? And again, those restrictions are the ones that are really going to complicate that. And from there, that's where the sort of approach, unfortunately, really starts to boil down to much more, as Stephen and Alex were talking about, the discretionary authority of those individuals at the physical border. And that translates or transfers even further beyond the idea of an ESTA or coming into under an ESTA, being able to meet the standards, which I haven't been in this country for 14 days. I have not, I can adhere to the requirements of the travel ban. There are two factors to be considered. Is my ESTA even valid? Are they going to even allow me to complete one in advance? And the mitigating factor as well is this is dictated by airlines. So those airlines, if and how you're able to get a flight into the United States from a European nation or from some third country, they're going to review that, they're going to make those requests, and that the airline is really sort of up against a wall to make sure that they don't allow these individuals on who may be subject to that bar. And as a result, that's another real aspect that has to be sort of understood and considered prior to traveling to or attempting to travel to the United States. And I think the discussion, of course, where Canada now has opened up or is potentially, a consideration for a landing spot in advance, coming into Canada and then traveling to the United States for the birth of the surrogate child, would be for the adopted child, would be for entering into Canada and seeing what those options are, staying here, and then, and I would say that this is probably sort of the highest level of scrutiny and difficulty, but is really about the only option that you can look to, is the possibility of what's called being paroled into the United States under humanitarian parole. Finding out a way, figuring out a way, or already resident in Canada and entering into the United States, a physical border is really sort of the last attempt or possibility to then approach that border and identify a humanitarian issue, which would be that humanitarian medical issue of the delivery of your adopted child. And that again is subject to, there's no guidance, and I really would have to say sort of reflection, and as Cindy sort of talked about from the off the top, is that there unfortunately has not been the level of guidance that Canada has been able to identify. And that is a factor, I think, inherent in that, is that adoption in many, in such large parts within the United States is dictated on sort of state by state determination, and internal adoptions within the United States are much more sort of nebulous in comparison to these hard, fast rules of coming in and bringing in an adopted child back to the United States. Those complications for international travel following an adoption is really where we can, again, fall to this final piece or final possibility, which is at the border, potentially proposing to this officer who gives that Roman thumb of yes or no, that this is an urgent medical issue and we need to travel to the United States to welcome the birth of our child. And that again is just something that, unfortunately, the bad planning and the sort of inconsiderate aspect of these travel bans is really sort of the core issue, that there is no other option other than claiming to them, I have this need to get into the United States for urgent medical issue. And the consideration of, well, to make the argument that I have an urgent a family member who is a U.S. citizen that I must visit, that unfortunately is really precarious in terms of them then countering to say, well, that adoption hasn't necessarily cleared. And I think that's most definitely one area that we can help and coordinate with, for other attorneys dealing with the fertility issues, dealing with the adoption factors, is to really kind of make an analysis of where we can sort of fall within those various options. Obviously, again, claim to U.S. citizenship is what we want to push forward to the most, but at the same time, then allowing for at least the story to be told and the information and documentation to be presented to say, this is my child, it is imminent, but really I think the consideration is how much sort of background and paperwork following the birth of the child is going to delay the ability for those new parents to arrive in the United States and be with their child. So again, that I think is all reflective in this sort of final baseline proposal of parents of imminently delivered child at the border saying, I need to enter for this purpose. And it comes down to humanitarian parole, medical issue, and whether, based on the standard that Alex and Stephen were talking about, the essentiality, which has been introduced on both sides of the US-Canadian border for essential entries for individuals who have essential need to be within the United States. And they are still recognizing, medical issues. So, it's really, the objective is to find or sort of carve out or identify that aspect of a medical urgency or a medical need, including the birth of my soon-to-be adopted child. So that really sort of covers all of it but I know that we wanted to, as we're pushing up at the sort of the end of the hour, incorporate Q&A, but I'm not sure if you guys want to step in and produce that. And Leah, I know that you want to do some sort of back and forth, some imminent questions that you guys have had.
Absolutely. If we could have all presenters join on the screen. Jordan has received a ton of questions. We're only going to take a few of them, and then the rest will be posted on our blog. I know many of our clients in Australia are going to be watching this later on. But I want to thank all of you. I know that this is really a moment-to-moment, day-to-day changing, very fluid situation here in Canada. And Timothy, thank you for joining us to speak about the US process. Many clients currently are searching for answers there. And so to anyone that's listening, we are going to send out a video with links to connect with these folks later on today. And Jordan, if there are a few short questions, and then whoever would like to answer them, please just jump in.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We do have quite a few questions coming in. A lot of people are asking a similar question, so we'll start with that. It's two parts. Number one is they would like to know, is the Canadian government providing quarantine accommodations for people flying into Canada? And part two, since international flights are only coming into certain airports in Canada, many IPs have to travel, up to a day's distance to get to the city where their baby is being delivered. What are the rules for quarantining? Do they have to quarantine in the city they arrive in, or can they get to their destination and then quarantine then?
So people have been allowed to enter Canada at the first port of entry and then continue on to their connecting flight, where they will then quarantine in the second city, their city of destination. That's been fine. There is no quarantine facilities or anything of that nature set up by the Canadian government. It's very much, a question you'll be receiving from the border officials as to what your plans are. I know that some people have been told, by hotels when they're booking that the hotel has a specific kind of quarantine policy and procedure in place. Some hotels are offering shuttle buses for people who have arrived, I think, to help with that kind of transportation piece. So it's very dependent upon what your plan is and where you're going. I think avoid public transit is a good piece of advice, and try to limit your interaction when you're arriving. If you have a good relationship with someone on the ground in Canada, perhaps they can pick you up and you can have protective gear in place for that car trip.
I should add that the letter that you get for permission does not specify that you will be granted the connecting flight from your port of entry to the other city, but that everyone has been so far. And it seems that they often don't find out until they've landed. So an Australian lands in Vancouver, finds out then that yes, they will be allowed to take the connecting flight to the next city to do the quarantine. And Leah, maybe you should share some of the experiences our clients have told us about the assistance they've had from their remarkable surrogates in helping them.
It has been amazing. We've had surrogates who are shopping and stocking the Airbnb for the intended parents. We've had surrogates send family members to pick up from several hours away. We've had surrogates deliver prior to the intended parents getting out of quarantine and caring for the babies. And it's just, listen, we're inspired by these women every single day. And it's just been amazing. And it's nothing. You speak to these women and they're like, well, of course they have to have food when they get here. Of course I need to send someone. And it's just been so inspiring. And, in terms of the intended parents arriving, my advice to everyone is retain these folks, get them taking care of this. Our job as a surrogacy program, Cindy's job as a surrogacy lawyer, is to help you insulate the relationship with your surrogate and to ensure that she feels safe, that she knows the baby is going to be cared for immediately upon their birth. And the way you can do that is to show up for her by taking care of these details, allowing us to refer you to the experts to take care of these details. And so if you are unsure how to proceed, reach out to any of us. We will guide you through this process. People are coming to Canada, people are getting home. We have systems in place with Passport Canada and with these guys in terms of getting you here. So please lean in, allow us to support you. You're not alone. We are absolutely available to you to help walk you through this process.
And do remember, couldn't have said better, the distance from the surrogate when you arrive.
Right, yes. Canada's a big place, so know that you will likely have to rent a car or figure out how to get to her, and we'll help you with that. Jordan, do you have a couple of other questions or one more maybe?
Yes, for sure. Just two more quick questions. A Canadian citizen coming from abroad, do they require an ETA to get into Canada?
No, Canadian citizens are not subject to ETAs. We have the absolute right to come to Canada, subject to the airline being satisfied that you're healthy, because they have the right to deny you boarding if you're not healthy. Once you get healthy, absolutely. So just understand that.
And
Okay.
Stephen, would you still suggest Canadians that are, have been living abroad for a number of years, would you still suggest that they connect with you to find out and ensure that they have everything in place, or is it as simple as just getting on the plane?
No, you don't need our help for that. You just make sure that you are healthy and you have the absolute right to get on a plane. But, as Cindy has stated and other people here, the window's getting smaller. So get home.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
We have
make sure
another
you're
question.
quarantining, isolating in your local place before you plan to come here. Don't get sick, please.
Thank you, Cindy. We have another question here. For those who aren't Canadian citizens, they would like to know, do they need to have a flight booked before requesting a letter to get into the country?
Alex?
As far as we know now, it is not a requirement to have your flight booked. You should have a general idea of when you need to be in the country, where you're going to be coming from, and where you're going to be arriving in Canada.
Jordan, I just have one more question.
Sure.
From a client who is in China and is concerned that the Chinese government may not allow them to leave. And so is there a mechanism or a way that you could help them deal with the Chinese government so that they can enter Canada?
I mean, the Canadian government, I guess, is so inundated helping Canadian citizens and permanent residents. I think you'd have a pretty hard time asking them to help you with other foreign nationals if they have the absolute right to control who enters or leaves their country. So if China says no, then I would suggest trying to find a local Chinese lawyer that can help you deal with their system, because we wouldn't be able to help you being Canada.
Okay, and would you know someone that you could coordinate with if they are required to hire you? Could they hire you and then you could recommend someone to help them?
We could probably help, or Cindy, I'm sure, has her contacts over there. I think amongst the group here, we could probably find someone to help them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Was that it, Jordan?
I would just like one more question, if possible, before we end things. Could you just remind everyone how do they go about getting that letter to get them entry into Canada? Who should they contact for that?
So I think if people have their own lawyer, that's the first person they should be making sure they're connecting with. And most of the lawyers are going to recommend Stephen's office, Stephen and Alex, to do it. This morning, I was provided with the address that I'm going to ask Jordan to post, if she can, for you, for the site. Immigration and Global Affairs have now created a team that will be reviewing all of the applications. And it's an email address that I've been given that should be on the immigration website, if not by now, soon. And it's COVID travel exemptions, and then the French version of the exemption des voyages, COVID at IRCC. And we'll post that up, or it'll be provided when the recording comes, one way or another.
My only hesitation there, if people are going to use that, remember, that's one for everyone around the world. So I would rather, the departments have agreed with Cindy and her group to sort of have a designated person to deal with these issues, so they don't have emails coming from all over the place, and it just would be more coordinated. If you want, the group's help to coordinate it that way, I think, in my opinion, would be the best. You're absolutely entitled to use that website that Cindy's referring to, that email, but remember, that applies to everyone around the world.
Yeah, and so really go through your lawyers and have your lawyers contact Stephen's office. And please remember, the most important thing here that I would reiterate is, as was advised, the immigration sends the letter sometimes at the very last minute. So patience, patience, patience in this very difficult, challenging time. I know is a big ask of everybody, but please, nobody has been rejected as far as we know so far who's having a surrogate baby in Canada.
And on that note too, you know, you will very likely receive it via email. So if you're en route to the airport, you know, make sure your phone is charged, make sure you have your email, and you're able to pull that up to show the airline and the border officials when you arrive in Canada.
You know, it's interesting. Alex and I and Tim have been dealing with immigration for quite a long time. And, you know, we always tell people, if you think your document, you need it by 4 o'clock, you usually get it by 3:59. So that's just the way immigration kind of works. They do their best. So the sooner you get us the information, the better it is, but also understand that that's how they work. It just a couple minutes before you need it, but it gets there.
Well,
When I
thank
have
you,
some
everyone.
free time, my next job is going to be to try to get them to do it at like 3:57.
So thank you,
you.
everyone. It's been fantastic to hear how you've been helping people. You know, our goal is always just to get the information out, and we really appreciate your time today. We know that you're all busy managing many immigration issues and sending many surrogacy issues. So thank you so much. We truly appreciate it. And for those of you watching, please reach out to us, lean in, allow us to support you. It's absolutely our pleasure, and we will never be too busy to make you a priority. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay safe,
Thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, stay healthy.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Bye.